Part 1. The hidden sanctuary Lyra stood at the edge of the crystal lake, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. She had lived alone in this sanctuary for many years, away from the noise and chaos of the human world. Her silver hair flowed down to her waist, and her pointed ears could hear every small sound in the forest around her. The sanctuary was her home. It was a place hidden deep in the mountains where magic still lived and breathed. Here the trees grew taller than buildings, and the flowers glowed with soft light when darkness fell. Most importantly, this was where the dragons lived. Lyra had come to this place 10 years ago with only one purpose: to save the dragons from extinction. Humans had hunted them for their beautiful scales, wanting to use them for armor and decoration. The dragons had nearly all disappeared from the world. Lyra could not allow this to happen. She used her ancient elven magic to create a sanctuary where the dragons could live safely and raise their young. Her 3 dragons were her family. Embark was the oldest and largest. His scales were emerald green with touches of gold, and he was as wise as the mountains themselves. When Embark looked at something, he seemed to see into its very soul. He had lived for over 500 years and had seen empires rise and fall. Silvara was smaller and more graceful. Her scales shimmered like the night sky, deep blue and silver. She was clever and curious about everything. Silvara loved to explore every corner of the sanctuary, and often brought Lyra gifts of interesting stones and plants. She had a playful nature that sometimes made Embark shake his large head in disapproval. Ember was the youngest and the smallest. He had been born with wings that would not grow properly, so he could never fly like his parents and siblings. When Lyra first found him, other dragons had rejected him, but Lyra took him in and raised him with love and care. Ember had become the most affectionate dragon in the sanctuary, often curling around Lyra as she worked or slept. Each morning, Lyra would wake before dawn and prepare food for the dragons. She would gather the special herbs and plants that grew only in this place. The dragons needed these foods to stay healthy and strong. Their scales needed the minerals found in the mountain streams, so Lyra would spend hours helping them bathe in the enchanted water. The sanctuary was protected by powerful magic. Invisible walls surrounded the entire place, preventing humans from finding it. If anyone tried to enter, they would see only a dark forest filled with dangerous creatures. They would hear strange sounds and feel a deep sense of dread that would make them turn back. Lyra had set these protections carefully, using spells taught to her by the elders of her people. Lyra's daily routine was simple but fulfilling. She spent her mornings caring for the dragons. In the afternoons, she would practice her magic, keeping her skills sharp and strong. In the evenings, she would sit with her dragons and listen to them tell her stories through the special bond they shared. This bond between Lyra and the dragons was not like normal communication. It was deeper and more personal. When she touched their scales, she could feel their emotions and understand their thoughts. They could do the same with her. Through this connection, Embark had told her about the great dragon wars of ancient times. Silvara had shared memories of flying through storms and racing across moonlit skies. Ember had showed her simple but beautiful moments, like the feeling of warm sun on his scales or the taste of his favorite fruit. Life in the sanctuary was peaceful and quiet. Lyra had made peace with her loneliness long ago. She knew that her people, the elves, wanted nothing to do with humans anymore. They believed that humans were dangerous and destructive. They did not believe in interfering with human affairs no matter what happened. Lyra understood these beliefs, but she could not agree with them completely. Sometimes late at night, Lyra would use her magic to see what was happening in the outside world. She would watch the humans build their great cities in the sky and on other planets. She would see their ships travel through space, searching for new worlds to explore and new resources to take. She knew that humans were not evil, but they often did not understand the consequences of their actions. The elves had retreated from the world thousands of years ago. They had decided that the age of magic was ending, and that it was time to disappear into the shadows. Most humans had completely forgotten that elves existed. Some thought they were only creatures from old stories and legends. Only a few humans remembered the ancient times when elves and humans had lived together in peace and harmony. Lyra sometimes wondered what it would be like to speak to another person, not a dragon but an actual person like herself. She wondered what it would be like to share her knowledge and her burden with someone who could understand the human experience, but she had accepted that this would never happen. She was meant to be alone, to be the keeper of the dragons and the guardian of the old magic. The sanctuary provided everything she needed. Fresh water flowed from the mountains. Fruit grew on the trees without needing to be planted. The climate was always comfortable, never too hot or too cold. Game animals roamed freely, and Lyra could hunt what she needed to eat. The magic of the place kept everything in perfect balance. As Lyra watched the sunrise deepen from gold to orange, she felt grateful for her life. She had purpose. She had companions who loved her. She had work that mattered. What more could anyone want? She did not know that this peaceful morning would be the last quiet day she would ever experience in the sanctuary. She did not know that by nightfall, everything would change forever. She did not know that a choice she would make in the next few hours would affect not only her own life, but the fate of both human and dragon kind. Lyra called to her dragons, and they came running to greet her. Embark rumbled a deep sound of contentment. Silvara danced around her feet with joy. Ember nuzzled against her leg, seeking her warmth and comfort. In that moment, with her dragons around her, Lyra was completely happy. She had no idea how quickly that happiness would be tested. Part 2: The Distress Signal. The afternoon started like any other day in the sanctuary. Lyra was teaching Ember how to catch fish in the crystalline stream that ran through the heart of the hidden land. The small dragon was clumsy and often fell into the water, but he never gave up trying. Lyra laughed at his persistence, a sound that had become rare over the long years of her solitude. Embark rested on his favorite rock, his massive body soaking in the warmth of the sun. His eyes were half closed, but as always, he was alert to everything happening around him. Silvara was exploring a new section of the sanctuary where unusual flowers had begun to bloom. She moved between the plants with careful grace, examining each one as if they held great secrets. The day was turning into evening when the sound came. It was not a sound that belonged in the sanctuary. It was harsh and metallic, a screaming noise that seemed to tear through the very fabric of reality. It was a distress signal, the kind that ships sent out when they were in terrible danger. Lyra immediately straightened, her pointed ears rotating toward the direction of the sound. Embark jumped to his feet and his scales began to glow with a protective light. Silvara came running back, her playfulness instantly replaced by concern. Ember pressed against Lyra's leg, sensing that something was wrong. The distress signal came from beyond the protective barriers of the sanctuary. Someone out there was dying. Someone needed help desperately. Lyra could feel the panic and fear in that signal, as if it were being broadcast directly into her mind. For several minutes, Lyra stood frozen, torn between her instinct to help and her knowledge of the laws her people had created. The elves had strict rules about not interfering in human affairs. They believed that humans needed to solve their own problems. They believed that helping humans would only make them more dependent and weaker in the long run. But Lyra had always questioned these rules. She had spent years wondering if they were truly right. How could she watch someone suffer if she had the power to help them? How could she ignore a cry for help and still call herself good? Embark approached her slowly. He touched his large head against her shoulder, a gesture of support and understanding. Through their bond, he shared with her an image of Ember when they had first found him. Ember had been alone and rejected by his own kind. If they had not helped him, he would have died. Sometimes, Embark seemed to say through the image, the right thing to do is the thing that breaks the rules. The distress signal kept repeating, pulsing through the barriers like a desperate heartbeat. Each pulse contained new information. A ship had crashed. The crew was trapped. They had only hours of oxygen left before they would suffocate. Children were on board. The crew included scientists on a peaceful exploration mission, not military personnel looking for resources to steal. Lyra made her decision. She turned to her dragons and told them that she needed to go beyond the sanctuary, into the human world. Embark nodded his massive head as if he had expected this all along. Silvara came close and rubbed her scaled cheek against Lyra's arm, a sign of blessing and encouragement. Even little Ember seemed to understand, though Lyra could feel his fear through their connection. She equipped herself quickly. She took her grandmother's bow, a weapon made from ancient wood that had been carved by the first elves when the world was young. The bow could only fire arrows of pure crystallized starlight, arrows that could cut through almost anything. She also took a small crystal pendant that hung around her neck on a silver chain. This pendant contained a fragment of her own magical essence. If she was ever lost or trapped in the human world, she could focus on this pendant and use its power to open a pathway back to the sanctuary. Lyra also gathered several vials of the sacred water from the sanctuary's streams. This water had healing properties that could mend wounds and cure diseases. She wrapped them carefully in cloth so they would not break during her journey. Before she left, she placed her hands on each dragon and shared with them an image of her return. She showed them a vision of herself coming back safely, of them being reunited. She could feel Embark's doubt about whether she could really fulfill this promise, but he did not stop her. Her dragons trusted her to make her own choices, even if those choices might be dangerous. Lyra walked to the edge of the sanctuary, to the place where the protective magic was thinnest. She placed her hands on a large tree trunk and the tree began to glow with soft light. The bark shifted and changed, revealing a hidden doorway. This was a secret passage that Lyra had created years ago but had never used. She had created it just in case she ever needed to leave in an emergency. She stepped through the doorway and immediately felt the weight of the outside world crash down upon her. The air smelled different. The sounds were louder and more chaotic. The light from the sun was harsh compared to the gentle glow of the sanctuary. For a moment, Lyra felt dizzy and disoriented, but she pushed these feelings aside and focused on the distress signal. She could pinpoint its location now. It was coming from a valley about 5 miles to the north, on the other side of a ridge of mountains. She began to run, using her enhanced elven speed to cover the distance quickly. As she ran through the forest, Lyra marveled at how much had changed in the human world. The trees were smaller than in the sanctuary and many were dying or dead. The streams were less clear, their water polluted with substances that smelled wrong. She could feel the pain of the natural world, wounded by human expansion and neglect. The closer she got to the crash site, the more she could hear the sounds of destruction. There were explosions still happening, flames still burning. She could hear human voices screaming and crying out in fear. She could hear the mechanical groans of the damaged ship as its systems continued to fail. Lyra reached the crest of a hill and looked down into the valley below. There, half buried in scorched earth, was a massive spacecraft. Its hull was torn open in several places, and smoke poured out like blood from a wound. Flames still danced across its exterior, and she could hear the terrible sounds of metal tearing and systems exploding. She took a deep breath, drew back her shoulders, and began to descend the hillside. She was about to meet humans for the first time in over 1,000 years. She was about to break the sacred laws of her people. She was about to change the course of history. She had no idea how much courage this moment would require, or how much it would cost her to save the people aboard that ship. Part 3. The rescue Lyra moved across the burning landscape with purpose, her eyes glowing with ancient power. She was no longer thinking about the rules of her people or the dangers ahead. She was thinking only about saving the lives trapped in that broken ship. As she approached the crash site, a piece of burning metal fell from the sky and struck the ground near her feet. She did not hesitate or flinch. Instead, she raised her hands and began to chant words in the old elven language, words that had not been spoken aloud in thousands of years. The metal that was falling slowed down and gently drifted to the ground as if it weighed nothing at all. The flames that were burning most intensely began to cool and diminish. The broken sections of the ship that were about to collapse held steady as if being supported by invisible hands. Lyra had used her magic to stabilize the crash site, at least temporarily. Now she ran toward the largest opening in the ship's hull, a jagged hole in the side of the vessel where thick smoke was pouring out. Inside the ship, survivors were struggling in panic and confusion. They knew they did not have much time. The emergency power systems were failing, and the oxygen supply was running critically low. The ship's computer was giving them warnings with a calm artificial voice, counting down the minutes until they would suffocate. In the communications room, a young woman named Claire was still at her post. She had been trying to send the distress signal to any ship that might be near enough to help. Her fingers had been shaking as she typed the final message to her family, a message she had assumed no one would ever read because she did not expect to survive. Claire was in her mid-20s, tall and strong with dark hair that was now singed and matted from the heat. She had joined the exploration program because she dreamed of seeing worlds that no human had ever visited before. She had wanted to study how different planetary environments could affect human communication technology. Now she was going to die on a planet that she had not even finished mapping. As she was preparing to abandon her post, Claire saw something that made her freeze in amazement. A figure emerged from the smoke like a dream. The figure was impossibly beautiful and impossibly strange. She had pointed ears and silver hair that seemed to glow with its own light. She moved with a grace that seemed almost unnatural, her feet barely touching the ground as she walked. For a moment, Claire thought she was hallucinating from the lack of oxygen. But then the figure spoke to her, and her voice was like the sound of wind chimes mixed with the music of 1,000 stars. The figure said her name was Lyra, and she was there to help. She told Claire to gather the other survivors and move them toward the main exit of the ship. She explained that she did not have much time and that they needed to hurry. Claire did not understand what she was looking at, or how this beautiful stranger had appeared out of nowhere. But something in Lyra's eyes told her that she could trust this person. She immediately moved into action, grabbing a nearby communication device and calling out orders to the other survivors. There were 5 people in total who had managed to survive the initial crash and its immediate aftermath. Besides Claire, there was Captain James, the ship's commander. There was Dr. Marcus, the chief scientist who had been studying the planet's rock formations. There was Lisa, the engineer who had been trying to keep the ship's power systems online. There was young Tommy, who was only 16 years old and had joined the expedition as a junior technician. And there was Sarah, the ship's doctor, who had been treating the injuries of the other survivors. When Lyra appeared in the main corridor where these 5 survivors had gathered, all of them gasped in shock and fear. They had never seen anything like her before. Some of them thought she might be an alien creature that was going to harm them, but Lyra kept her hands open and peaceful, showing them that she meant them no threat. She began to guide them toward safety. With each step, she used her magic to clear obstacles and seal breaches in the ship's hull. When a metal door was jammed shut and would not open, Lyra simply touched it with her hand and the door slid open smoothly. When fire blocked their path, she made a gesture and the flames retreated, creating a safe passage through the heat. Captain James asked her who she was and where she had come from. Lyra explained that she was from the nearby sanctuary and that she had felt the distress signal. She told them that there was not time for long explanations and that they needed to get outside before the ship's structural integrity failed completely. The young Tommy kept staring at her in wonder. He asked if she was an angel. Lyra smiled at him kindly and said that she was simply someone who could not ignore a cry for help. She took his hand and helped him move faster through the corridors of the damaged ship. Dr. Marcus was trying to process what was happening from a scientific perspective. He was wondering what kind of being could exist that had such control over physical matter and energy. He was thinking about what kind of advanced civilization could have created someone like Lyra. But there was no time for his scientific curiosity right now. Lisa, the engineer, was watching Lyra's movements and beginning to understand that Lyra was using technology that was different from any technology Lisa had ever seen. It was not mechanical or electronic. It was something more fundamental, something that seemed to work with the universe itself rather than against it. Sarah, the doctor, was automatically evaluating Lyra from a medical perspective. She could see that Lyra was not exactly like any human she had ever studied. Her physiology was different. Her movements were different. Her presence seemed to have a calming effect on everyone around her. They emerged from the ship into the cool air of the evening. Behind them, the vessel gave one final terrible groan, and then large sections of the hull began to collapse inward. The very exit they had just run through disappeared as massive pieces of burning metal fell to the ground. Lyra set them down on a safe spot far from the wreckage and told them to wait. She closed her eyes and chanted again in the old language. The flames of the burning ship gradually extinguished themselves until only smoke remained. The danger had passed. The 5 survivors looked at Lyra with a mixture of gratitude and fear. They did not know who she was or what she wanted from them, but they knew one thing for certain. She had saved their lives when saving them had seemed impossible. They owed her a debt that they could never repay. Lyra looked at these 5 fragile human beings and felt a strange emotion stirring in her heart. She had expected to save lives today. What she had not expected was to feel so connected to the people she had saved. What she had not expected was the desire to stay with them and protect them further. Part 4. The sanctuary revealed Lyra led the 5 survivors away from the crash site, moving through the forest with careful steps to make sure none of them fell or injured themselves further. Captain James kept asking questions about who she was and where she was taking them. Lyra answered only that they were going to a safe place where they could rest and recover. The journey took about an hour. As they walked, Claire began to notice that the forest was becoming different. The plants were healthier. The air smelled cleaner and fresher. The sounds of the forest were more musical and less chaotic. It was as if they were moving from a world of decay into a world of life and vitality. Young Tommy asked if they were entering some kind of nature preserve. Lisa started to theorize about what could create such a dramatic change in the environment over such a short distance. Dr. Marcus was taking mental notes about everything he observed, already trying to figure out the scientific explanation for what he was seeing. Sarah, the doctor, was watching Lyra and noticing how the young woman seemed to become more at peace the further they traveled. Lyra's shoulders became less tense and a faint smile appeared on her beautiful face. Sarah realized that wherever they were going, it was Lyra's home. As they reached the edge of the sanctuary, Lyra placed her hand on a large tree. The tree glowed with soft light and a doorway opened up before them. This was the same doorway that Lyra had used to leave the sanctuary just a few hours earlier. When the 5 survivors stepped through that doorway, they fell silent in absolute astonishment. They had just entered a world that seemed to come from a dream or a fantasy story. Before them stretched a vast landscape of impossible beauty. Enormous trees rose higher than mountains, their bark shimmering with colors that did not seem to exist in the normal spectrum of light. Flowers as tall as humans bloomed everywhere, their petals glowing softly as the sun began to set. The sky itself seemed different here. The clouds moved with artistic purpose, creating formations that resembled animals and faces and things that had no names. The light of the sun was warm and gentle, and it seemed to fill the sanctuary with a peaceful energy. There was a lake in the distance that reflected the sky so perfectly that it was impossible to tell where the water ended and the air began. Streams of water flowed down the sides of the mountains and sparkled like liquid, silver in the fading light, and then there were the dragons. Captain James's breath caught in his throat. Dr. Marcus felt his knees go weak. Lisa forgot all her training and simply stood frozen in wonder. Tommy cried out with joy like a child seeing something magical for the first time. Sarah put her hand over her mouth and tears began to stream down her face. 3 dragons approached them slowly and carefully. The largest was Embark, his emerald and gold scales shimmering as he moved. The second was Silvara, her midnight blue and silver form flowing like liquid moonlight. The third was Ember, small and vulnerable but no less magnificent than his larger companions. Embark came first, lowering his massive head toward Claire. His eyes were ancient and knowing. For a moment, Claire was afraid. This creature was enormous and powerful, and she was just a fragile human. But then she felt no threat from him. Instead, she felt a sense of acceptance and welcome. Lyra explained to them that these were her dragons, and that they were the reason she had built this sanctuary in the first place. She told them about how the dragons had nearly been hunted to extinction by humans who wanted their scales for weapons and armor. She explained that she had dedicated her life to protecting them and giving them a place where they could live in peace. She told them that they could not reveal the location of the sanctuary to anyone. She explained that if the outside world discovered this place, humans would come and try to capture the dragons again. The protective barriers that surrounded the sanctuary were strong, but they were not infinite. If too many people found out about it, eventually, the barrier would fail. Captain James promised that he and his crew would keep the secret. He explained that they were explorers and scientists, not hunters or warriors. He told Lyra that what she had created here was invaluable, not just for the dragons, but for all life in the galaxy. He said that the world needed to know that magic still existed, that natural beauty and wonder still had a place in the universe. But Lyra told him that the world was not ready for that knowledge. She explained that humans needed to first learn to respect nature and to stop destroying it for profit and power. She said that when humans were ready to understand what magic was, then they could have this knowledge. But that time was not yet. Claire approached Ember gently. The small dragon had always been her favorite, even though she had only just met them. She knelt down beside him and reached out her hand slowly. Ember came to her and rubbed his scaled head against her palm. Through that touch, Claire felt a connection to the small dragon, a feeling of kinship and understanding. That night, Lyra brought the 5 survivors to a comfortable shelter that she had built within the sanctuary. It was made from living wood that had grown into the shape of a home, complete with sleeping areas and places to sit and rest. The walls were soft and comfortable, and the air inside was perfectly warm. She gave them food and water from the sanctuary. The food tasted better than anything they had ever eaten before. It seemed to heal their bodies and calm their minds. Sarah examined it from a medical perspective and could not find any explanation for why it was so nourishing and restorative. As they rested that first night, Captain James called them all together. He asked what they should do now. He explained that the rescue ship would eventually arrive to search for them. They would need to decide whether to reveal the sanctuary's location or to hide it. Lisa said that hiding it would mean they could never return to human civilization. They would have to choose to stay in the sanctuary forever. Young Tommy said that he did not mind that idea at all. He said that this place was more beautiful than anything he had ever seen in the human world. Dr. Marcus was torn between his desire to share his scientific discoveries and his knowledge that doing so would put the dragons in danger. Sarah asked what Lyra wanted them to do, saying that it should be Lyra's choice since she had saved their lives. Lyra looked at all of them and told them that she was not sure what the right answer was. She explained that she had lived alone for so long that she had forgotten what it was like to consider other people in her decisions. She told them that she needed time to think about this and that they should rest for now. But that night, as Lyra lay in her own chamber with her dragons around her, she realized something important. She did not want the survivors to have to choose between the sanctuary and their people. She did not want them to lose everything they had known just to keep the sanctuary's secret. There had to be another way. Part 5, A New Beginning. The rescue ship arrived 3 days after the crash. Captain James used a hidden communication device that Lyra had given him to send a message to the rescue team. He told them that all 5 survivors were alive and well. He explained that they were safe in a hidden location and would return to human space in a few days. But before that happened, Lyra called all 5 survivors together for an important meeting. She told them that she had spent the last 3 days thinking about their situation and about what was best for everyone involved. She said that she had come to understand that keeping the dragons hidden forever was not the right solution. Claire listened intently as Lyra explained her thoughts. Lyra said that if she kept the sanctuary secret, the humans would continue to hunt dragons on their own world. They would eventually discover the truth about where the dragons were coming from. Or worse, they would breed dragons in captivity and treat them cruelly, not understanding their intelligence and their consciousness. Instead, Lyra proposed a different approach. She said that one of the 5 survivors should stay behind in the sanctuary and help her with a new mission. This person would learn everything about the dragons and about the sanctuary. They would learn the ancient magic that protected this place, and then, when the time was right, this person would help Lyra educate humanity about the importance of dragons and the need to protect them. Captain James asked which of them Lyra wanted to stay. Lyra looked around at all of them and said that she was not sure. She said that she could feel something special in each of them, a different kind of courage and wisdom. Then Claire stepped forward. She said that she would stay. She explained that she had spent her whole life searching for something meaningful, something that mattered more than her own safety or comfort. She said that protecting the dragons and helping Lyra accomplish her mission was the most important thing she could imagine doing with her life. Lyra looked into Claire's eyes and saw the determination and the kindness there. She reached out and took Claire's hand. Through that touch, they formed a bond that was almost as strong as the bond between Lyra and the dragons. The other 4 survivors returned to human space. Captain James made a report to the authorities about the crash and the rescue. He did not mention Lyra or the dragons or the sanctuary. He only said that they had been rescued by an unknown person who had appeared at the crash site and led them to safety. When the authorities pressed him for more information, he refused to give it, saying that he had made a promise to protect the identity of their rescuer, Lisa. Dr. Marcus, Sarah, and Tommy all agreed to keep the secret. But more importantly, they began to work together to change how humans thought about the natural world and about the creatures that lived in it. Lisa used her engineering skills to design new technologies. that worked with nature instead of against it. She created systems that could harvest energy from the sun and the wind without damaging the environment. Dr. Marcus published papers about the importance of preserving endangered species and protecting their natural habitats. Sarah began training other doctors to understand that healing the natural world was just as important as healing human bodies, and young Tommy became an environmental activist, telling anyone who would listen about the beauty and wonder that still existed in the galaxy if people would just take time to look for it. Meanwhile, in the sanctuary, Claire began her new life. At first, she missed the comforts of human civilization. She missed technology and music and the sight of other humans working together. But gradually, she adapted to her new home. Lyra taught Claire about the dragons. She showed her how to understand their thoughts and feelings through the bond that could form between a human and a dragon. She taught her the old elven magic, the language of creation that could heal wounds and calm storms. Claire learned that magic was not about making grand gestures or spectacular displays of power. Instead, magic was about understanding the fundamental connections that held all living things together. It was about using that understanding to heal and to protect and to create. Ember became Claire's closest companion. The small dragon seemed to understand that Claire needed a friend more than anyone else. He would curl up beside her at night and keep her warm. He would bring her plants and stones that he thought she would like. He would play with her in the streams and help her learn to move through the sanctuary with the grace and speed of an elf. Embark taught Claire about history and wisdom. He would share memories from his 500 years of life. He would tell her about the ancient times when elves and dragons had worked together to protect the world from destruction. He would explain why the sanctuary was necessary and what the future might hold if humans continued to ignore the natural world. Silvara taught Claire about joy and curiosity. She showed her the hidden places in the sanctuary where rare plants grew. She taught her how to climb the tallest trees and see the world from a new perspective. She reminded Claire that even in the midst of important work, there was always time for play and laughter. 1 year after the crash, Claire was working with Lyra in the gardens of the sanctuary. They were tending to plants that would one day be used to create medicines to heal human diseases. Claire realized that she did not feel sad or regretful about the choice she had made. She asked Lyra if she ever felt lonely, even with the dragons and now with Claire to keep her company. Lyra thought about this for a long time before answering. She said that she had felt lonely for most of her life, but that loneliness had slowly transformed into something else. It had become a kind of peace, the peace that comes from knowing who you are and what you are meant to do with your life. But now, Lyra said, she did not feel lonely anymore. She had companions who understood her. She had Claire, who was beginning to understand the world the way Lyra understood it. She had the dragons who had always loved her. And through the work she and Claire were doing together, she was beginning to connect with humanity in a new way. Lyra told Claire that she believed that the day would come when humans would understand what they had learned in the sanctuary. She said that one day, humans would be ready to live in harmony with nature and to respect the dragons as the intelligent, conscious beings that they were. When that day came, Lyra and Claire would help bridge the gap between the two species. They would show humanity that there was more to life than technology and conquest. They would teach humans to remember magic and wonder and the beauty of the natural world. But for now, they would wait. They would tend the sanctuary and care for the dragons. They would study the ancient magic and prepare themselves for the day when their real work would begin. As the sun set over the sanctuary, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, Claire stood with Lyra and the 3 dragons. She thought about how different her life was from what she had expected. She thought about the crash and the fear she had felt. She thought about how a beautiful stranger had appeared and changed everything. She realized that sometimes the most important choices in life are the ones that seem impossible. Sometimes the most meaningful paths are the ones that require leaving everything familiar behind. And sometimes the most powerful magic in the world is simply the choice to care for another being and to work together to create a better future. Claire took Lyra's hand, and together they walked back into the sanctuary as the stars began to appear in the sky above them. Behind them, 3 dragons followed, their scales shimmering with the light of the emerging stars. In the world beyond the sanctuary, seeds had been planted. 4 humans were working to change how their civilization thought about nature and magic. One day, those seeds would grow into something magnificent. One day the hidden sanctuary would need to be hidden no longer. But that day was still in the future. For now in the sanctuary peace reigned, and in that peace the most important work of all was being done, the work of preserving beauty, protecting life, and preparing for a brighter tomorrow.